Here it is, our next video. I already messed up, I dropped my marker. I'm gonna grab it real quick. Let's peek behind the camera. So, hello everyone, it's Mr. Bowman. I'm here once again to talk to you about literature and reading and give you something else to think about when there's kind of a lot going on. Today's is not a funny short story. It's a very good, very smart short essay by the novelist and essayist and professor Tod Goldberg. Now, I talk about Tod Goldberg a lot in my class because Tod happens to be my friend. He's professor and one of the directors of the Master of Fine Arts program at the University of California, Riverside. He's a New York Times bestseller. He's written a bunch of books. Let's look at some of them. This is one of his first books. It's called Other Resort Cities. It's a collection of short stories, all of which take place in the area that I live, in the Coachella Valley. It's excellent. It's really, really excellent. It's very literary. It's very high-minded. It's very, well, people being sad. It's literary fiction, which I really love literary fiction. It's not really everyone's thing. Now, Tod did a few books in this vein. Another one called Living Dead Girl. That's really excellent. That's worth thinking about. Before he switched over to crime writing. Now, his beginnings of crime writing, he doesn't talk about as much, but I actually think they're terrific. He wrote novelizations for the TV show Burn Notice. Now, when I've talked to Tod about these, he kind of goes, I did those. I think they're terrific. I really think they're good. They're incredibly efficient and smart pieces of writing. They click right along. They're really great. I like them very much. There's like 5 or 6 he's written, something like that. Now, what he's known for and what he's blown up for and the kind of current wave of his success is continuing in crime. He's now brought together the kind of pulpy stuff, which, I mean, I like them. They are indeed pulp novels. And the literary stuff, he's combined these into the Gangster series. First is Gangsterland, and then its sequel, Gangster Nation. And there's a book of short stories coming out called Gang Related, probably the fall, I think, something like that, that's supposed to be related to it. And then there's going to be a third novel as well. They're all about a guy named Sal Cupertine, who's a hitman who becomes the Rabbi David Cohen. We're not going to talk too much about it. They're terrific books. If you can get your hands on this, you absolutely should. It's really, really great. But we're not talking about any of those books today. We're talking about an essay that he had published in Alta Online. So Alta is a magazine. Alta Online is their online presence. The title of the essay is The Salton Sea is One Weird Place. It might be good to pause the video and look up The Salton Sea is One Weird Place by Tod Goldberg. Tod spells it T-O-D, just one D, Goldberg. And Alta Online is A-L-T-A. If you just look up A-L-T-A, Salton Sea, I'm sure it'll be the first thing that pops up. If you look up Goldberg, Salton Sea is One Weird Place, it'll pop right up. Either way, you should find it. You don't have to print it up, but if you have the capability of printing it up, it wouldn't be a bad idea, because we're going to be talking about this in real depth. I want to look at how would we write an analysis of this? What is Tod doing with this essay? What's really going on with it? Okay, ready? Why am I pausing? You can hit the pause button. I was going to press on. Oh, before we do, this will give you time to find the essay. One, my shirt today, Michael and Job and Lindsay and Buster. This is my Arrested Development shirt, the Bluth children. If you're looking for something to stream online, Netflix has all of Arrested Development. The first 3 seasons are terrific. The other 2, I like to pretend they don't exist, to be totally honest. But those first 3, magnificent. You should totally check them out. They're great. You'll understand why I have a shirt dedicated to it. Now, we also have my glass for today. I don't have my mustache glass. I have my Pam Grier glass. This is from the Badass Hall of Fame. There was an online magazine that's now defunct called Badass Digest. And they had this film event at the opening of a movie theater in Denver. And Pam Grier, product of Denver, and a legend of 70s cinema, and really like the beginning of like badass femme fatales in a more modern mode. There was in the 30s and 40s certainly, but she's the first like modern, really aggressively cool one, I'd say. And Pam Grier is amazing. So this is my Pam Grier glass. We should totally have Pam Grier in a Tod Goldberg discussion. And then I've got my hat here. This hat is a coyote running through the Coachella Valley. You'll see this is very appropriate. It's hard to see here, but there's little windmills, wind turbines, beg your pardon, because this is representative of the valley and the coyotes that live here, which will make sense for this essay, which is about things going on here in the Salton Sea. So, let's go ahead and start. The Salton Sea is one weird place. If you are taking notes, I would recommend you look for what devices is Tod using, Goldberg using, I should use his last name. What devices is Goldberg using? How's he using them? I'm gonna be looking at his syntax a lot, his organization, and what ultimately is his real point. All right, the Salton Sea is one weird place. Subhead. The Salton Sea is one weird place. That may be why so many works of literature keep trying so hard to figure it out. By Tod Goldberg, Alta Online, March 18th, 2020. A few months ago, I drove 30 minutes from my home in Indio to the shores of the Salton Sea to see an art installation. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, hell, 7 years ago, that sentence would have seemed absurd. No one went to the Salton Sea for anything, much less art. But as California's great inland sea and its most profound environmental mistake has begun to die more rapidly, it has become ripe for metaphor. Here exists folly, it screams out. Come interpret it while it lasts. On this day, here existed as part of the site-specific exhibition Desert X, an installation called A Point of View by the Colombian artist Ivan Argot. A circle of stairways to nowhere, reaching into the sky, surrounding the north shore of the sea. From the ground, the stairs seemed benign. 16 steps up to a 5-foot wide platform, no railing. But then you climb them and suddenly you're thrust into the desert sky and it's hard not to feel uneasy. You think, I could die out here. And that's the truth. You could die out here. Because everything appears to be dying out here. Even the air has a suggestion of death. From the stench of the tilapia, whose bones crunch along the desiccated shoreline, to the remnants of a winter of dead birds, victims of avian cholera, and the hydrogen sulfide gas, often at dangerous levels, wafting off the sea. If you fell, on most days, it might indeed be a long time before someone found you, only the burning sun to keep you company, at least until the coyote showed up, and the biting flies. Let's pause here. Goldberg he's pulling so many tricks out of his hat. One, he's using italics at different points in the text. You think I could die out here. Now, that's not a strange way to use it. Often authors, if they're having like interior monologue, you wouldn't want it in quotes, so you use italics for that. So that's not that odd. But immediately after it, you could die out here. Could being in italics. That's interesting. Then he has parentheticals, and he has a couple in a row. He has 3 in one sentence. From the stench of the tilapia, parentheses, whose bones crunch along the desiccated shoreline, to the remnants of a winter of dead birds, parenthetical, victims of avian cholera, and the hydrogen sulfide gas, parenthetical, often at dangerous levels. Pulling every trick out. But then he goes real big. The end of the paragraph is only the burning sun to keep you company. The next paragraph is a single sentence, at least until a coyote showed up. And then another single sentence paragraph immediately after it. And the biting flies. We're going to come back to all this and talk about it, but if we're looking at syntax and organization, tons of stuff here. Let's keep going. What planet have I landed on? The narrator of Gail Brandeis's novel, The Book of Dead Birds, wonders after stepping out of her car to encounter the sudden beauty of the sea's, quote, flat shimmer. And the redolence of decay mixed with the, quote, environmental odor of agricultural runoff. It's a jarring juxtaposition, right? I know, language there, and we're talking about juxtaposition. For my students, these are big things. And the alliteration there is interesting. A desert ocean, that's an oxymoron, surrounded by the pockmarked chocolate mountains. The question Brandeis raises is not an uncommon one. In Into the Wild, John Krakauer calls the Salton Sea, quote, an otherworldly setting where, quote, snowbirds and drifters and sundry vagabonds congregate. William T. Vollmann in Imperial, an epic dissection of the region, lands early on the word ghastly and sticks with it. This place can't be real, but it is. In truth, the Salton Sea is a uniquely American disaster because context matters. The Salton Sea has existed in its current form only since the Colorado River flooded the Salton Basin in 1905. But plans to rewild the basin go back as far as the 1800s, with everyone from the government to development companies, to your average grifter wanting to get into the game. Once the sea was here, all 400 square miles of it, it only made sense to develop it. Although this too may have been an idea for another planet, because no Earthling would have forgotten to factor in, the salt. Quote, "There will always be people like my mother who love a mistake," Marissa Silver writes in her 2007 Salton Sea novel, The God of War, "who will claim it, coddle it, and grow it until it has a purpose of its own, until they forget the erroneous beginnings and become something necessary, something they can't live without." At first, the sea was loved. But then, as the bare fact of its existence became apparent, there was never supposed to be water here. Hey, buddy, what's going on? Rocket's in here.
Here.
Rocket, I'm recording a video. Do you want to say hello? Come say hello.
Who are you talking?
Well, I'm posting it to the internet, and hopefully students will watch it and learn. You have food all over your face. Oh, well, that kind of got some of it off. That's a very big egg. What are you doing with that egg?
I don't know.
All right, well.
Just
That's been a good
close
story.
your eyes and put your hand in and grab something out.
I don't like this idea.
And then I close it.
Okay. All right, I'm going to close my... Are you going to open it? Okay.
Okay, close your eyes.
Okay, my eyes are closed. God.
Oh, it's
What just happened?
spilled.
What happened?
It spilled.
Oh, it was very exciting, though. Yeah, it was a surprise.
I try to open it and then go open.
But it did open. It just went over. But, honey, was I supposed to be surprised? Guess what?
I don't want you to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to do it again a little bit? Okay. Can I give you this? Okay. I got to go. We'll play in a minute. I promise. Thanks, honey. Oh. That's Rocket slamming the door over and over. The surprise did not go well. Well, back to it. Let's reset here. Now we're back to the essay. Where were we? Let's start that paragraph over. It opens with a quote from The God of War. "There will always be people like my mother who love a mistake," Marissa Silver writes in her 2007 Salton Sea novel, The God of War, "who will claim it, coddle it, and grow it until it has a purpose of its own, until they forget its erroneous beginnings and become something necessary, something they can't live without." That's the end of the quote. At first, the sea was loved. But then, as the bare fact of its existence became apparent, there was never supposed to be water here. The money people pulled up the stakes. A few left their stakes. You can still see them jutting from the sand. I grew up a few dozen miles away in Palm Springs during the 1980s. As teens, we'd drive out from our homes on pristine golf courses, slice east through the fields of dates and other produce, and disturb the abandoned dreams of Desi Arnaz and Jerry Lewis, prowling the old yacht club, drinking warm beer on the veranda. You could imagine the Beach Boys performing, speedboats racing across the fastest water on the continent, Frank Sinatra in a tuxedo. You could imagine those things. We did not. We came to forage, to escape. This was before we tried to find a narrative. This is when the sea could still be saved, but not preserved. From Argoat Stairs, I could still glimpse those moments. The 400 square miles were now 343. This sea below sea level was sinking further each day. The state unable to address it, the bill too high, $8.9 billion by one estimate, when compared with the cost of other public concerns. As a metaphor, it's a stinking reality. I could come back now to be inspired by what is missing. I'm sorry, I misread that. I come back now to be inspired by what is missing. Though most visitors are here for what feels like cataclysm tourism. It's quite a phrase. You can get an Airbnb at Slab City and cosplay Krakauer. Spend a week pretending you're about to decamp to meet your fate. You can park on an unfinished block of Salton City, track a low-flying Cessna, imagine that inside is Harry Bosch from Michael Connelly's Two Kinds of Truth, trying not to let opioid dealers toss him to a shallow death. If That doesn't appeal. Just wait for the New York Times style section to show up again. They've been around a few times in recent years, capturing hipsters from elsewhere in trendy clothes, celebrating a place that is Burning Man minus the fire. It occurs to me that fashionable indifference may be the ironic stance of despair. That photographic history will immortalize a vision of this land that is not of any world at all. The stairways will be gone in a few weeks, the sea soon enough. I wonder if any piece of literature could hope to define this place. We let it be, we let it die. It was our fault all along. That's a pretty interesting and striking piece of writing. And there's a lot to say. Here's the thing with this. I'd have a hard time saying on my first reading what Goldberg is getting at here. That's interesting. If we're analyzing this for rhetorical analysis, if we're looking at it for, hell, with anything, with any piece of reading, ultimately we should be sitting back and saying, well, what am I supposed to take from this? What are we supposed to take from this? It's a good question. It took me a while to come to any kind of conclusion, and I'm not certain that I'm right. I just have suspicions. So, I think that Goldberg here is working very much in the Michel de Montaigne idea of an essay isn't an argument necessarily, an essay is an exploration of an idea. It's an attempt to essay, in French, to try, to make an attempt, right? Goldberg is trying to say something, he's trying to figure something out. Now, this initial idea, I think, is really helpful for us. Now, you're welcome to just skip all this stuff in the video or just go away if you're not interested in this kind of analysis. And hell, I don't know if I'm right with any of this. It was just published. I mean, it was just published. I haven't talked to Tod about it. I have no idea. I'm nervous he's going to watch this and say I'm an idiot. We're going to find out. But if I was doing a rhetorical analysis on this, I would have to say, here's his major devices, here's why he's using them, here's what he's trying to get at. Let's start with the devices. I see allusion here. Let's start with allusions. Now again, allusions, not illusions, because we're looking at how does he use references to other pieces of literature to make his point. Now the next thing, which I was struck by, even as reading it aloud to all of you, would be syntax. His syntax and his structures are really, really interesting. I'm also going to look at his use of imagery. The imagery is always negative and destructive in some way. Even images of himself as a teenager in high school illicitly drinking beer is destructive behavior. Everything in this piece is about something being destroyed. And it has the opportunity to be saved. It has the opportunity to be preserved, made into something better, but is neglected and destroyed instead. Now, I've said to my students, you're not allowed to just say diction. It's not fair. It doesn't mean anything. Every piece of writing uses diction because they all use words. His, however, I'm going to go a little bigger on that. I'm going to say it's using a specific type. I'm going to say it's using... We just got interrupted because of a phone call coming in. Don't they know I'm trying to teach remotely? Don't they know what I'm trying to do here? I'm clearly an amateur at all this. I'm kind of making do with what I have at home. Apologies in advance. All right. Goldberg is using violent diction. I might also say something about unhealthy diction. We'll get more with that in a bit. And then I would also want to talk about his tone. Now his tone, it has a few things going that are pretty interesting. I would say his tone is foreboding much of the time. I also say that his tone is also often nostalgic, that it has a lot of nostalgia to it. It's looking back to the past and thinking about what it was like then. Now, nostalgia is maybe not quite the right term, because nostalgia almost always has a pleasantness to it. This is nostalgic, but it's not pleasant what he's thinking about. It's distinctly unpleasant, which is very interesting. All right? So these are the main devices I'm going to look at that I'm using here. Now, his allusions are pretty much all literary. He does do some others. I mean, he's talking about an artwork, but there's, as I recall, there's no allusions to other pieces of art, so I wouldn't say that necessarily. We pointed out some of his syntax. Now, he does that single sentence paragraph thing another time, and 2 more times. Uses it with because context matters. How interesting is that? He's got the line because context matters and it's isolated. as though it exists alone without context, that line itself. And his use of because there, because by its nature should be following something up directly. And he does it also with the at least until the coyotes come up. Same thing, there's that hang, there's that pause in there. And the biting flies. You would never normally start a paragraph with the word and. It's completely absurd. I mean that in the best possible way. I really love it. But he's so flagrantly breaking the rules. The other time he does it is to say, as a metaphor, it's a stinking reality. Now, this is a reference to the beginning of the piece when he talks about the art as a metaphor, right? By the end, I'm not sure he's still talking about the artwork. I think he's talking about the sea itself and what it's become a metaphor for, what it's helping us represent. So again, there's lots of things here, lots for us to figure out. Okay, now when I was going through it, I have my copy, and you can see I have notes all over my copy. I was annotating as I went, trying to figure out all the little things that I think are present in here. And there's a lot. Now, if I was to construct a thesis statement of some kind for this, mine, for my AP stuff, would look something like this. I would say, I'm going to do some abbreviations so I don't run out of room. TG's Salton Sea. TG Salton Sea, right? I'm going to change that. In TG Salton Sea, Goldberg uses. Now again, we can get stronger verbs there. We could go with utilizes, employs, whatever. I have a few different ones I can do here for my exam. They're going to be really helpful to me. Uses, utilizes, employs, whatever. I'm going to go with literary allusions, jarring syntax. There's an adjective for you. Jarring syntax. I like that very much. And violent diction. I don't want to do too many. I could go further. In fact, I might scratch one. I might go with, I'm going to scratch literary allusions. I'm going to go with imagery. Employs stark imagery, jarring syntax, and violent diction. I think this is actually a really strong beginning here. So let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to do this. Let's erase this board. What would I use? Oh, wait. I haven't even said what he's doing yet. In order to portray the loss of potential through squandered opportunities. That's not bad. To portray the loss of potential through squandered opportunities, as shown through art. I'm going to say natural disaster. It's not quite right. Ooh, you know what? I want environmental disaster. That's closer to it. Environmental disaster. And personal choices. Something like that I think works pretty well. Now, my real sloppy handwriting on this whiteboard is not the best thing in the world, but I'm just coming up with ideas for my paper, what I'm going to do. So what am I going to talk about for these things? For my stark imagery, look at how he describes the Salton Sea. Look at all these lines he uses for it. We have here the image of the remnants of dead birds who have died of the cholera. The stench of the tilapia, right? Whose bones crunch along the desiccated shoreline. Now I'm going to jump around a little bit here. His word choices there are wild. Whose bones crunch. So you're stepping on them as you go along, right? A desiccated shoreline. Desiccated means totally and completely dried out. So again, the shoreline's dried out. We can imagine kind of a crust there from the salt and from the dead fish. But I don't think it's a coincidence. I think Goldberg is aware that the word desiccated sounds so much like the word devastated. I think there's something there. He could have said dried out. He could have said withered. He could have said parched. He could have said all kinds of things. Why desiccated? Desiccated is a really, really interesting choice. And it's not common speech. He writes in a fairly conversational tone. That is not a conversational word choice. So clearly there's something going on there. Let's see. The remnants of a winter of dead birds. A winter of dead birds. Winter evoking death, and that they're blanketing everywhere, maybe like snow. That'd be really interesting. If you fell on most days, it might indeed be a long time before someone found you, only the burning sun to keep you company, at least until the coyotes showed up. That's strong imagery. We understand that if someone's hurt there, eventually the dogs will come for them, very literally, right? The biting flies. You're going to be set upon by every level in nature while you're out there trapped. He talks about all these different authors, all of whom are worth talking about, but I wouldn't expect a high schooler necessarily to have these references in their back pocket. Krakauer, maybe. That one with Into the Wild. A lot of AP teachers actually teach that book. I find the protagonist so unlikable that I don't like reading it. But William T. Vollman, who's a really interesting guy, who's worth reading, really interesting dude for reasons that we don't need to go into here. In truth, the Salton Sea is a uniquely American disaster. These are big ideas that he's talking about here. Okay, I'm jumping around, and I apologize. I keep thinking about, because context matters, and as a metaphor, it's a stinking reality. By singling those out, we're back to talking about his syntax here, I suppose. He's really emphasizing some key ideas for us. Oh, someone else is coming in. Oh, no, they've changed their mind. Oh, maybe? Back to it. So, I apologize for the jump cuts. It's interruptions. We're all trying to do our best at home, right? Right. So, which it does make it harder for me to concentrate. I apologize. Let's see. It occurs to me, I want to go down to his last paragraph here real quick. It occurs to me that fashionable indifference may be the ironic stance of despair, that photographic history will immortalize a vision of this land that is not of any world at all. The stairways will be gone in a few weeks, the sea soon enough. I wonder if any piece of literature could hope to define this place. We let it be, we let it die. It was our fault all along. Okay, I'm going to put this down and just talk about the piece for a bit, because all these interruptions are making me a little goofy. All right. What's Goldberg doing? What's he talking about? The piece ultimately, let's get to a general summary of it. The essay is describing a piece of art from Desert X. The Desert X installation is a series of stairways that go nowhere. They ascend and they go nowhere at all. Now that they're at the Salton Sea, that they're at the site of this environmental disaster is really, really interesting. The Salton Sea is a place that used to be a resort for the wealthy. In the 50s, 60s, started to die out in the 70s, is my understanding. I'm not from here. But it's that jet set, Rat Pack Sinatra thing. When he talks about Sinatra in a tuxedo, that's precisely what he's talking about. So all those images and those feelings. The artist has you there when you go up the stairs with no railing, no safety. You just ascend. Find yourself at the top, and you're standing in the midst of all this nature, of all this nothing, of all this sky, but you're also surrounded by disaster. The work itself is temporary and is going to be taken down. The work is in the middle of a place that was temporarily beautiful and then was neglected and then fell apart. But there's more to it than that. It's not just that it was neglected, it's that it's an artificial paradise. It's not a real thing. It was a constructed notion. It was a falsehood that people water skied upon, right? That's really interesting. Now, when Goldberg writes about it, he uses language that never makes it seem appealing. Even when talking about what it used to be back in the day, he never makes it sound appealing. Instead, he has language that is momentarily safe but is ultimately dangerous. From the ground, the stairs seemed benign. Benign is an interesting word choice. Whenever I think, now benign technically means like friendly or harmless or not dangerous. Pretty much the only time in modern society we use the word benign, though, is when we're talking about results for cancer tests. If you have a tumor and you get a test done, it's either benign or it's malignant. The stairs seemed benign. They seemed okay. But we understand it's only what it seems. That's not really the case. If it's not really the case, that means they're ultimately malignant, that they're dangerous, that they're threatening, that they're harmful. And it's from there we get this idea of the coyotes and the biting flies. Salton Sea has existed in its current form ever since the Colorado River, so we get that whole thing of how it came to be. And this quote from Marissa Silver is interesting. If you want to talk about illusion, this would be a really good one to use. There will always be people like my mother who love a mistake, who will claim it, coddle it, and grow it until it has a purpose of its own, until they forget its erroneous beginnings and becomes something necessary, something you can't live without. Goldberg says, at first the sea was loved, but then as the bare fact of its existence became apparent, that there's never supposed to be water here, the money people pulled up the stakes. It's not just that the money people put up the stakes, it's that it was left to wither and die. And when it did, everyone in the valley is left kind of holding the check for it, so to speak, right? We're all left with the disaster of it. As a metaphor, it's a stinking reality. How does he set that up? From Argo's stairs, I could still glimpse those moments. He's talking about before, right? As teens, they'd go out and see this place. As a metaphor, it's a stinking reality. What's the metaphor here? It starts out, the staircase is a metaphor. The piece of art is a metaphor of some kind. It shifts to saying that the Salton Sea is a metaphor for something. I think it's about temporary beauty. It's about trying to seek out and grab something. It's the lack of ability to capture an idea, the lack of ability to capture a moment, the lack of ability to preserve something. And then when we fail to grasp it, it falls apart. It rots, it stinks, and it becomes toxic and poisonous. We want to go back to those things. Authors keep trying to capture the Salton Sea, to really understand it and to show it and to make it real. But they can't. We keep trying to grab onto these things and make them real, make them sink, make them land for us. We're unable to do so. There's something interesting there. Now, all that said, I don't have any clue if I'm right. I've got all my notes, got my boards. I have no clue if I'm right about any of this. I think it's a reasonable interpretation. I think I find evidence to back myself up. I think his language is leading me to that place. Am I right? I don't know. And I'm doing this a little too off the top of my head, to be honest. Getting interrupted and all the rest. But Goldberg is doing so many things here that are interesting with language, I think it'd be worth looking at. I think also it'd be worth looking at, how's this a good example of an essay? Because I'd argue it's an excellent example of an essay, even though I'm not entirely sure what he's getting at. How can that be? The essay shouldn't be a 5-paragraph thing that you're always just being told to write. Now, students, if you've made it this far in this, frankly, mess of a video, I would encourage you to do something. I want you to write an essay, but one that just explores an idea. You don't have to know where you're going. You don't have to know if you're going to end up where you start aiming for. I want you to explore an idea and push through it as much as possible. Bring in things from your life, things that make you think of, things that you relate to. Now, of course, with everything going on in the world right now, it'd be natural to write about the virus and people in stores and all the rest. And you can do that, sure, why not? But you might want to look at this as a more escapist opportunity. Think about something in your life that is interesting that you don't quite understand. Maybe you understand parts of it. And then write about that. Try to explain and fumble your way through some kind of understanding towards some kind of truth and work toward it. As you think of bands, songs, stories, movies, whatever else, pull them in, pull in quotes, grab whatever you want. Grab evidence from the world that you live in and that surrounds you. If you write something like this, I would love to see it. I'd love to read it. Send it along. I apologize for the jumpiness of the video. You're all the best. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.